Thank you for watching today. My name is Daniel Biggs, and I have an important message to share with you. It has been prophesied that soon a Sunday law will be enacted. Ellen G. White writes, efforts are being made to restrict our religious liberties. An amendment to our Constitution is being urged in Congress, and when it is obtained, oppression must follow. Are you awake to this matter? Protestants stood up against oppression. Protestants were America's founding fathers. According to the dictionary, a Protestant is a member or follower of any of the Western churches that are separate from the Roman Catholic Church and follow the principles of the Reformation. Protestantism isn't dead. Reformation isn't dead. And now I introduce to you Don Frost, a Protestant, a reformer, and an evangelist who has a timely message that needs to be heard. Thanks for joining, Don.
Thank you, Daniel. It's wonderful to be here with you today.
Don, you went to Washington, D.C. to protest the Pope. Why did you go?
When I heard that the Pope was going to be coming to Washington, D.C. for sure, I spoke with many people and I said, hey, you know, America is a Protestant nation, or at least it was, founded on Protestant principles. And I was urging people, hey, you know, why aren't we doing something about it? And I was sort of directing these to leaders in the church, these comments, you know, why aren't we doing something about this? Well, why isn't the leadership doing something about this? And an event happened one day, and a thought popped into my mind. Hey, you're a Protestant. And these things don't happen to me very often. And, you know, it's just this thought came out of nowhere. Hey, you're a Protestant. And I said, yeah, I'm a Protestant. And I kind of chuckled to myself. And literally just a few seconds later, another thought popped into my mind. Then why aren't you protesting? And that sort of took me back. Not only the fact that there was sort of this little voice in my head saying this, but it took me aback because I felt guilty. I felt like I was a hypocrite because I had been saying, you know, why aren't we doing something? Why isn't somebody doing something about the Pope's visit? And I became convicted that, hey, you need to do something. What are you doing? And so that's how the impetus for the drive to go to Washington and protest the papal visit. I flew to Washington, D.C. I went to the appropriate authorities and found out that that for this particular meeting with the Pope, that there wasn't any availability at all for any kind of a demonstration. I had sort of a backup plan in case I wasn't able to get a permit. We had the idea that we wanted to make a documentary of the Pope's visit. So I had read online that you could apply for a permit to make a documentary or a movie up on Capitol Hill. So I applied for that, figuring, well, media, news crews, people that want to make documentaries would be allowed up there to do this, and was informed that, yes, normally you could do this, but for the papal visit, no documentaries were going to be permitted to be made on Capitol Hill. So I said, well, then obviously the news media is going to be covering this. How could I get a press pass? Is there any way to get a press pass for this event? And they said, well, we don't issue the press passes. And I said, well, who is issuing the press passes for this event? And they said, quite frankly, we don't know. And I said, well, is there anybody that can tell me? And they said, well, why don't you contact one of the news organizations in town? So I went to CBS News, and I I asked them if they, how do you get a press pass for this event? And they told me at CBS News, they said, you're not going to be able to get a press pass for this event. And I said, why? And they said, well, Congress turned over to the Catholic Church the authority to issue the press passes at this event. And unless the Catholic Church has sent you an invitation, you're out of luck. And that really blew me away when they told me that. And I said, well, that's a news story in and of itself, that Congress turned over the authority to issue press passes to the Roman Catholic Church. But I want to back up a little bit. While I was still up on Capitol Hill applying for the permit, once it was discovered that I had flown all the way in from the West Coast to apply for this permit, and literally everything that I had tried to do, I was kind of shot down. One of the other individuals that was in the background was listening to the conversation and did her due diligence just to make sure that every location up on Capitol Hill where they normally allow people to come and demonstrate was off limits. And it turned out that there was one spot that was available, that the Congress and the papal delegation that was planning this event hadn't made off limits. And I said, I would like to apply for this spot. And so they said, well, you can apply for it, but we can't guarantee that you're going to get it. And once they discover that one of these areas kind of slipped through the cracks or somebody overlooked, they're probably not going to issue it to you. And they brought over a map to me of the Capitol Hill grounds, and they showed me on the map, they said, it's this area right here, area number 7.
Tell me about where you're located and what you start to see.
Well, they gave us this area number 7, and it's a beautiful garden area on the north side of the Capitol building. And the Capitol Hill complex itself is the United States Capitol building on one side, and it's flanked on either side by offices for the congressmen and for the senators. And they placed us in the area that was right next to the door, literally just feet away from the door, where everybody has to go through when you're coming into the Senate building. I guess since 9/11, security has been really tightened there, and instead of being able to really come through the front door, everybody has to go through this door on the side of the building, which is right where we were, and go through the metal detectors. And so as we sat up there, the foreign dignitaries, Vatican officials, senators, the limousines and the Escalades and the black Suburbans would pull up with the Secret Service personnel and security, and they would open the doors up and walk them into the building from where we were. And we had our banners set up right there, and I watched a number of these papal delegates that were in their priestly garments would get out of their vehicles, and they would look right over at where we had our banners set up, and it was just pretty amazing that so they were able to identify that, hey, there's a group over here. But we were told when we were up on Capitol Hill by law enforcement that they'd never seen any demonstrators like us before, and that they said if everybody was like us, there would be no need for them. So,
was there any connection between the papacy and the security?
Yes, as the time got closer for the Pope to speak, in particularly the day before, delegations or security personnel from the Vatican were abuzz all over Capitol Hill, sort of directing the scenes. I remember being right in front of in this very spot where the Pope, his car was going to pull up, and me and a couple of my brethren were there and we were getting some video shots because they weren't going to let us take video and be right there when the Pope got out of the car. You know, they had the snipers and all these paramilitary law enforcement officers out there. And so you had these papal personnel were literally just pointing to the various law enforcement and telling the media what to do and everything. Everything was completely choreographed by these priests. They were in priest outfits and stuff.
Is it safe to say the papacy was running the show? What they were deciding who was there to protest. They were deciding who was going to take up these spots, and they were actually also controlling security.
Yes, they were dictating who could cover the event, news media-wise. Whether it was determined by the Congress or Congress solicited by the papacy, but it was mandated that there was no dissension going to be allowed, and save us on Capitol Hill, the only dissenters would have to be a long distance away on the public streets and stuff, but right on Capitol Hill, we were the only ones allowed to have permission up there. They were directing the news media, the security. They were choreographing the whole event. Everything was choreographed and staged to make everything appear exactly how they wanted it.
So what you're saying is our government gave the Roman Catholic Church the power to decide what happens on our Capitol Hill.
Yes, absolutely. That's what we witnessed, yes.
So you are stationed right next to the Senate building.
Mm-hmm.
Are you seeing anything interesting going on over at the Senate building while you're right next to it?
We saw a great number of interesting things. But I think one of the things that really just, it was a sad thing, because as Americans, we believe in a separation of church and state. And we saw many meetings take place, and we were told, because we asked, why are all these Catholic priests, one car after another with these Catholic priests, and I say car, most of them are like motorcades and stuff like this, pulling up, and these dignitaries and officials from the Vatican going into the building one after another. It's one thing if the Pope is to come and make a speech, but it's another thing, why do you have these legions of teams of Vatican officials that are going into the Senate building and meeting with Congress and the Senate, and what is it that they're doing for days leading up to this meeting? And so we asked, we said, what's going on? And they're like, well, we're having meetings. And since our proximity, we had this sign, and on the sign we had the pure woman from Revelation chapter 12. We were under this banner, these are those that keep the commandments of Jesus. And so, but this little image that we had on there of the pure woman, it looked like Mary. And one of the things that we figured out was that Catholics and these Catholic priests were being drawn to our demonstration because we really looked like people that were there to support the papal visit. And they would get up to where we were, and they saw we had some tables out, and they would look on the tables and they would see great controversy, and they would be like, oh. And I said, well, what are you guys exactly doing in here? What are you doing in there? And they said, well, we're here with the advance team from the Vatican, and we're here to train the U.S. Senate on what specifically the Pope's climate change agenda is about and educate them as to what we're trying to achieve. And that's when I said to them, I said, I read the Pope's climate change encyclical, and I noticed that the Pope mentions the Sabbath in the encyclical. And he talks about animals having a day of rest, and I'm putting two and two together, and it looks to me like the Pope wants to have a Sabbath rest for the land, a Sabbath rest for the environment. And it seems to me like the Pope wants to have a worldwide Sunday law put in place, and through this green Sabbath, I didn't say green Sabbath, but through this Sabbath rest for the land or for the environment, that the whole world would shut their businesses and factories and everything down one day a week, and thus you'd be able to lower greenhouse emissions. And he looked at me and he goes, "That's exactly what this is about." And with that, they just turned on their heels and walked away.
You're seeing the papacy and you're going into the Senate House, and what you're finding out is they are basically laying the groundwork for a Sunday law.
That's correct. But using this as, who wants everything to be polluted, right? Nobody wants pollution. Nobody wants our rivers and streams polluted or anything like that. And so what they're trying to do in the guise of being environmentalists is to say, hey, we need to help rebuild society. We need to heal the land and all this kind of stuff. And the best way we can do it is by having a green Sabbath.
Tell me a little bit about the people's reaction. You were able to pose some questions.
How it would start out is we would say, hey, would you give us an interview? And so we would give them an interview, and we would just say, hey, where are you from? And they would tell us where they were from. Most of the people that we interviewed worked up there, but there was some people there that were there for the Pope's visit, and some people that were just tourists in Washington, D.C. So we had a cross-cut of Catholics, non-believers, Protestants, just across the board. And we would ask them, we would say, do you believe that climate change is man-made? And they would say yes or no. And the majority of them said yes, they believe that climate change was man-made. First question is, do you believe that climate change is man-made?
I definitely believe that man has played a significant role in it, yeah.
Now, do you believe that climate change is man-made?
I feel like it could be possible, yeah.
Okay.
I feel like we could play a role in it, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you believe that climate change is man-made?
I believe that a great portion of it is man-made and that we have to do something about it.
And then we would ask them, what do you think about if the Pope had a plan and that he was to share it with the world, that we could lower greenhouse gases by having polluting factories and mills and different things like that, and businesses shut down once a week, and that would lower greenhouse emissions by 1/7. Would you support something like that? And by and large, most people said, yeah, I would support something like that. And one of the concepts would be to have mandatory forced closings on Sunday, so that not only could families spend time together, but that it would actually also lower greenhouse gases. Would you support something like that?
Yeah, I guess I would. Yeah.
You would?
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely
I think
would.
it's coming.
Let me ask you a question. Would you support a law that mandated that all factories and businesses and shopping centers and things like that be closed one day a week to reduce greenhouse gases around the world?
I think I would have to know more of the details of it, but that certainly sounds like a good idea to me. I'm in favor of reducing climate change. So,
Would you feel comfortable that it would be that a law would be put in place making it the law of the land that this was mandatory?
Would I feel comfortable? I guess, yeah. If it's gonna help the climate change, then yeah, of course I'd be okay with it.
And would you support it if it was compulsory? In other words, if they mandated that everybody had to do it?
Yes, I would.
Okay. So even if it went against, say, their religious conscience, they would still have to abide by it.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, I think the environment is more important.
And then we would ask the question, well, would you believe that a law like that should be enforced, that people would get fines or possibly imprisonment if they violated this law? And they would say, yeah, if they're going to pollute, they should be fined.
I think that in terms of laws with fines, I think that some monetary penalty might be useful to enforce that.
And then I said, well, if this law was to go into effect and everything was to be closed down one day a week, what day in the week do you think that would be on? And they would say, Sunday. Yeah, a lot of stuff is closed on Sunday now, so that would be the most logical day. So if the Pope pushed for a one day of the week, Sunday, to have a mandatory closure, would you be in support of that?
On a Sunday? Sure, most businesses are closed anyway on a Sunday, so that would be the natural day that you would target if you were going to go down that path.
Yeah. So if a decision was made to have all the pollution factories and all this kind of stuff shut down one day a week, what day of the week would you choose?
Definitely Sunday, I think. Sunday.
Now, if the thought was put out there that one day a week would be selected to let the land rest or let the environment rest, which is in the Pope's encyclical, what day of the week do you think that would be?
I would hope for Sunday.
If you were going to pick a day when everything would have to be closed to lower greenhouse emissions, what day would it be?
Sunday.
A 1 day a week of rest for the environment, what day do you think would be chosen?
Well, I think the natural choice would probably be Sunday.
And then I would say, okay, so you would support then what would be known as like a Sunday law or a Sunday closing law. And they would be like, yeah, a Sunday law. And then sometimes we would ask the question like, well, so the Pope, if he's recommending this, who would stand to be benefited the most by having a Sunday law? And they would think about it for a second, and they would say, the church. And I would say, oh, yes. So do you see why the Pope would want a law like this to be put in place? And then the dots would start getting connected, and they would kind of wake up and be like, oh, wow, that's interesting. Never thought about that before.
So the papacy delivers the encyclical to our Senate. And so now our government is being briefed on a law that is soon to come, possibly.
And when the Pope comes, he's not trying to force his encyclical in his speech to the Senate or the American people. All that is being made in backroom deals, just like everything else that's done up there.
And the people that you're interviewing, they are very in support of this because they see that this is something that the Pope is championing the environment, and they see this as something wonderful for the environment.
The support, now not everybody supported it. In fact, I was quite surprised in our interviews, especially with young Catholic people, that they were against it when they heard about the idea. But by and large, most of those that have a say support it. And here's why. In Congress, you have two parties. We have basically a two-party system, Republicans and Democrats. And the Democrat Party is supported in a large way by labor unions. And the Republican Party, in a large way, is supported by evangelical Christians. And so here's what you have. Labor unions support a Sunday law because they want the union workers to be able to have more time off. So it's advantageous for union employees to have a Sunday law. Evangelical Christians support a Sunday law because they believe that the nation is going down the tubes because people aren't going to church. Catholics support a Sunday law because it's an idea that initiated with the Pope. And finally, environmentalists that want to see greenhouse gases and the environment healed would support a Sunday law because it would lower greenhouse gases. So you see these four groups here, which are the movers and shakers that are lobbying Congress on all these different things, and they all support a Sunday law.
And I think if we look into the past, when church and state comes together, oppression does follow.
Yes.
And obviously it's affecting our Constitution and our religious liberties.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me now about September 23rd, 2015. The Pope comes to town. Tell me how he came, where he went, where he gave his speech. Tell me what you saw.
Well, what happens is that the Pope comes to Washington, flies in at Andrews Air Force Base, meets with the president at the White House. They have a parade for him. He goes to Congress on the day that he goes to speak there before a joint House of Congress, delivers a speech, and then goes out onto the west front of the United States Capitol building, facing the Washington Monument, which is an obelisk, and addresses the American people. As we were there and kind of realizing what was going on, we were like, wow, we've made like an image to the papacy. Because the U.S. Capitol building architecturally looks like St. Peter's at the Vatican. And even down to the detail is that St. Peter's has an obelisk that is in front of St. Peter's. And the United States Capitol building, which is architecturally similar to St. Peter's, also has an obelisk in the front. Now, when the President of the United States, every 4 years we have an election, and on the years when we elect a new president, there is a tradition here in America that the new leader meets with the president at the White House. And then after the president meets at the White House with the incoming president, then the new incoming president, or the president-elect, then travels to Capitol Hill, where he meets with Congress at an event they usually call the prayer breakfast. And then after the meeting with Congress takes place, he then walks onto the west front of the Capitol, takes the oath of office by the Supreme Court, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and then speaks to the American people as the president for the first time. And as we were there, we were thinking about this whole thing, and we saw later a clip from then Speaker of the House, John Boehner, saying that the Pope had requested that he was going to speak to the American people. As we saw this event that was taking place, it was all choreographed. Obviously, the Pope wasn't the new president, but the station from one place to another was exactly the way it is for the new coming president. First meet with the President of the United States, then meet with Congress, then go out onto the west front of the Capitol building, facing the obelisk, and address the American people for the first time. Only difference is this. When you're at the Vatican and they elect a new pope, the cardinals do their little behind the door, whatever it is, and then at a certain day, the special color smoke comes out of this little pipe. And then the new pope comes out of this balcony, this balcony door, and he addresses the waiting masses in front of the obelisk. This happens every time there's a new pope. After the Pope addressed Congress, we had thought that he was going to come out and address the American people at that platform area where the president takes the oath of office, but that's not what happened. There's a balcony that's on the west side of the Capitol building with a door, and the Pope came out of that door, just like at the Vatican, on the balcony there, and he addressed the people from this balcony above where the president normally speaks to the American people. And I've never seen any foreign leader or even a president that I know of address the American people from such an elevated position. And so it was just like, it was literally just like the choreography as if the Pope was at St. Peter's. Everything was in detail. Like, hey, here's the new leader, so to speak.
So the Pope lands where the president lands. He walks where the new president-elect would walk. And he goes into the building where the new president would be inaugurated, yet chooses to stand above.
That's correct, yes.
Where the presence would be.
Yes.
In essence, it looks like he's putting himself above all the presidents we've had in the past.
Yes, and the way that I'm viewing it is that we're told in prophecy, in Revelation chapter 13, and of course in the writings of Mrs. White, that this nation would clasp hands with the papacy. And what we see is that, and make an image to the papacy. And what we were witnessing, we believe, is that our government would make an image to the papacy, and that we saw that image in a major way being formed. And that now the last series of events will transpire with these backroom deals to bring this Sunday law into place, that's going to be brought into place not by religious power, but by, we want to heal the land. Nobody wants to pollute, right? Because, if you do that, you're not a good person, right?
That's right. That's right. So the Pope leaves. You have an opportunity to go into the Senate building yourself. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, so the Pope left, drove away, and that was all choreographed. He's driving in his little Fiat and everything. And it was like, everybody's like, oh, he's such a humble guy. He's not in a limousine, he's just in this little Fiat. So he drives away or is driven away. And we were just like, okay, what now? We came, we were there for days, we handed out books, we met with politicians and staff, and we met with news media, and we gave Bible studies. And so through a series of events, me and one of the team that was there on the ground took the time that we had for the rest of the afternoon, and we just started going from one Senate office to another. We were able to go to 9 Senate offices that day. And as we were going in and we were sharing with them prophecy and exposing really why the Pope was there and talking to them about the Sunday law and the Pope's real goals and everything, the interest was there. Like in one of the Senate offices in particularly, they were really excited and they wanted us to come back and give more presentations. And while all this was going on, the thought started coming into our head, hey, these people need to know the truth. The papacy needs to be unmasked for what it's really doing here, that it's trying to bring church and state together through this scheme, and that we need to come back here in a major way and give Bible studies. And we got to thinking, hey, this is a community just like any other community in America. It just so happens to be that this is a community of the leaders of the free world. And they need to hear this message just like anybody else. And so the thought starts coming to us, hey, we need to have an evangelistic series here for the people on Capitol Hill. And we need to expose what the papacy is really about and share the everlasting gospel with these people. And so that's where the mindset that day that we were there and realized that, hey, these people need to hear the three angels' message. And so at that time, we started planning, we're going to come back here, and by God's grace, we're going to give a series right here on Capitol Hill for the United States Congress and Senate, for the staff, for the aides, and we're going to share the message of the third angel with them.
Well, Don, I just find this whole story fascinating, and I feel more than ever a sense of urgency that we need to let people know what's going on, especially with the Sunday law dawning upon us. This has all been prophesied.
In the Bible, there's a story about a prophet, and his name is Elijah. And Elijah was in a situation where there was a climate change. It hadn't rained for 3.5 years. And everybody knows this story, and if you don't know the story, I invite you to look it up in 1 Kings chapter 18. So in this story of Elijah, it doesn't rain for 3.5 years. And by the way, in Kings, it doesn't talk about the 3.5 years, but you can find that in the book of James. In this story, there's no rain for 3.5 years, and I can only imagine, Daniel, what it's like with no rain for 3.5 years. Not only wasn't there rain, but there was no dew for 3.5 years. So the conditions must have been atrocious. And so what happens here is that the prophet Elijah comes. He comes to Ahab. And who's Ahab? He's the leader of the nation. And Ahab at this time has gone into an alliance with Jezebel, who is really a priestess of Baal. And Jezebel in the book of Revelation is really a representation of the false church at the end of the world. And here we have this story where Elijah, in verse 21, it says, "And Elijah came to all the people and said, How long halt ye between two opinions? If the Lord be God, follow him, but if Baal, then follow him. And the people answered him not a word." So Elijah came with this message, how long halt ye between two opinions? And he's bringing out, hey, there's a living God. The reason why all this drought and no rain has happened because you guys are worshiping Baal. Now you have to make a decision. And in the story of Elijah, if you read this out, the rest of the story, eventually in chapter 18, verse 38, fire comes down from heaven and endorses the true prophet, who's Elijah. And when this happens, in verse 39, it says, "And all the people saw it, and they fell on their faces, and they said, The Lord, He is God, the Lord, He is God." So in this story, what you have here is that when the prophet comes with the word of God, the people say not a word. But when this supernatural event happens and fire comes from heaven, the people fall on their faces and they say, "The Lord, He is God, the Lord, He is God." Seeing is believing, obviously. And this is an example for us at the end of the world, because here in the book of Revelation, as those of us that are following the third angel's message, we see in Revelation chapter 13 a story that's going to happen at the end of the world. Revelation chapter 13. And we see that this beast that's identified, a beast that comes up out of the seed, we see in our studies that that beast is a representation of the papacy. But another beast comes up out of the earth, and that beast gives its power and might and authority over to the first beast, that all the world would wonder after that beast. But here in verse 13, it says, "And he doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire to come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men." And verse 14 says, "And he deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast." And so you see in the story at the end of the world that fire comes down out of the sky again, but this time it's not to endorse the true prophet, Elijah. It's to endorse false worship. And see, at the end of the world, the just shall live by faith in the word of God. But at the end of the world, in this story, people aren't doing this, and so they're going to be deceived by these false miracles that take place. In the book Great Controversy, I have a quote here I want to read with you, and I believe that this applies to what we're trying to achieve here with having a series that goes to the leaders of this nation. And this quote is going to say it better than I could possibly word it. It says, and this is from Great Controversy, the book Great Controversy, page 606. It says, "But the Spirit of God came upon them as it came upon Elijah, moving him to rebuke the sins of a wicked king and an apostate people. They could not refrain from preaching the plain utterances of the Bible. Doctrines which they had been reluctant to present, they were impelled to zealously declare the truth and danger which threatened souls. The words which the Lord gave them they uttered fearless of the consequences, and the people were compelled to hear the warning. Thus the message of the third angel will be proclaimed. As the time comes for it to be given with the greatest power, the Lord will work through humble instruments, leading the minds of those who consecrate themselves to his service. The laborers will be qualified rather by the unction of his Spirit than the training of literary institutions. Men of faith and prayer will be constrained to go forth with holy zeal, declaring the words which the Lord gives them. The sins of Babylon will be laid open. The fearful results of enforcing the observances of the church by civil authority, which is exactly what's going on right now, the inroads of spiritualism, the stealthy but rapid progress of the papal power. And brothers and sisters, never in our lifetime have we seen such rapid events, rapid and progress of the papacy than we are seeing at this time right now. All will be unmasked. By these solemn warnings, the people will be stirred. Thousands upon thousands will listen who have never heard words like these. In amazement, they hear the testimony that Babylon is the church, fallen because of her errors and sins because of her rejection of the truth sent to her from heaven. As the people go to their former teachers with eager inquiry, are these things so? The ministers present fables, prophesy smooth things to soothe their fears and quiet the awakened conscience. But since many refuse to be satisfied with the mere authority of men and demand a plain "Thus saith the Lord," the popular ministry, like the Pharisees of old, filled with anger as their authority is questioned, will denounce the message as of Satan and stir up the sin-loving multitudes to revile and persecute those that proclaim it. Brothers and sisters, the time is here that these messages must go out now with force. We can't sit back now and wait for events to progress. We have to give the warning message so that these truths about the Sunday law can go out before the Sunday law goes into effect, so that when the Sunday law does go into effect, the people will know that there is a people that God has on the earth that know the end of things as they're getting ready to transpire, and will have faith and confidence in the messages that God gives us. The papacy is moving with rapid speed at this time. Events are transpiring. The Protestant churches are joining hands with the papacy as never before. And we must be about our Father's business, and we must give the warning message. And if we don't, their blood will be on our head. I ask my brothers and sisters in Adventism to set aside unimportant things and to press together as a people at this time now to do a work in the community that you live in the churches, and in this nation. I invite everybody that is watching this video to join with many of us from around this nation and around the world, not just one ministry, but many ministries that are pressing together to do this great work in Washington, D.C., to unmask the papacy. This series will be called Heal Their Land. And this series is going to be about having an alternative plan to the papacy for healing the problem that faces society. But not through having a law that forces conscience to observe a day, but by introducing them the health message. Through a plant-based diet, the same things that are trying to be achieved by the papacy by forcing conscience can be achieved by introducing methods that God has given us, and might I add, in a better way, in a much better way. Cost of health care can be lowered, our streams and rivers can be healed, the land can be healed if we would but follow God's plan. And so we're not going to go up there and just say, hey, don't listen to the Pope's plan. We're going to say, hey, the Pope's plan goes against our Constitution. It goes against our conscience. Here's an alternative plan that makes sense. It works better. And by the way, we're going to share with them the prophecies of the Bible and unmask who the papacy really is and what his true objectives are. If you are interested in helping, you can help financially, you can help with your time, you can help with your prayers. You are welcome to volunteer. We are going to need many team members on a bunch of different levels for these series up on Capitol Hill. Much work is going to have to be done. Many evangelists from people that have a gift in the area of health and in the area of helps, in literature evangelism. Much groundwork is going to be needed to be done, and I invite everybody to participate, especially in prayer. And like I said, there will be a contact information that will appear on the screen, and if you are led by God to take part in this great endeavor to warn the world and the leaders of this nation in Washington, D.C., I invite you with me to pray at this time for this endeavor. Shall we bow our heads? Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this opportunity to share with my brothers and sisters about the events that are soon taking place. And Lord, I pray that you would pour out your Spirit on us, that you would press us together, set aside the unimportant things, and Lord, help us lift up you and your banner to give this last warning message. Father, this is the last warning and the last message that will ever be given to this world. For the Sabbath is the great controverted point and will be the test of all mankind. Lord, forgive us where we have failed you in the past. We thank you for your long suffering with us and your patience with us. And we ask now that you would empower your people now to go forward and finish this work so that you can come home. That you can come here and take us home with you is my prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Don.
Thank you, Daniel.
See, and I just want to thank you today sincerely for watching this production, and I sincerely would ask that you would keep us in your prayers, and I hope we can go forward with this. Thank you.
Amen.